Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the what's Tuesday night live stream now. It's not even the Monday night live stream because life happens. So now we're Tuesday night live streaming it. And just so everyone knows, look down. Hold on, wrong corner. Look down here, like the Brady Bunch. We've got Jonathan with us today. It's usually that's true. Hold on, I didn't practice.
I don't know how there. Yeah. Oh,
see, it's all messed up.
Yeah. I don't know which way y'all are on your screen, but I'm in the bottom on my screen.
No, you are. That's correct.
Okay.
It's just the orientation of pointing doesn't quite work.
Yeah, like, oh, it's giving you away.
Yeah. So, tonight we are going to be talking about, or if you're watching on the replay, we're going to be talking about a tweet that I had put up. Here's the thing. There's you guys know. I mean, there's stuff that gets posted on the page that some people are like, oh, whatever, and then there's some really spicy stuff. And some stuff takes off better than other stuff, right? And so usually women in ministry stuff, usually people get pretty spicy about that. But this tweet that I'm going to mention, it generated quite a few DMs itself, like a lot, like more so than I thought. So we'll throw it up on the screen real quick. Throw up on the screen really, really fast. So this is Daryl Harris. I don't know if anybody's familiar with who Daryl Harris is. I think, if I could be getting this wrong, I'm pretty sure he is like the communications director or something like that from Grace to You, which is John MacArthur's thing. But he tweeted this out, and I looked at it. I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And then I tweeted it out, or not tweeted out. I like shared it on, I just shared it on the stories, and I was like, hey, I like this idea. This is a pretty good idea. And do you want to guess who the people were that were like not very happy with this at all? Youth ministers under 30.
Yeah. Except for one, may I add.
Oh, that's true. Well, and this is why I'm glad that you're on here tonight. Actually, I wanted to rearrange this whole live just so you could be on here, because you fit in that category of who he's talking about. So it's really interesting to me. So I know you all can read. I'm assuming you all can read that are watching this. But if you can't, just real quick, Daryl was like, I wouldn't hire a youth minister who is under the age of 30, maybe even 35. Now, just so everybody's clear, I'm 30. I'm 38. I'd want that person to have at least some life and ministry experience under him and could objectively look in terms of maturity and giftedness in such a role. And then everybody's head exploded. So
yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm gonna yell at both of you now. No.
Hey, excellent.
I didn't put it up there. It wasn't me.
It's all your fault, Matt.
Not only did I put it up there, I put it up there with 100 emoji.
Oh,
like, yes.
boy.
It's like a super agree is what I was going for. So let's pick your brain a little bit first, Jonathan, since you're on here. You're the youngest of us, and you are in youth ministry.
Yeah, and I'm under 30.
And you fit all of these categories.
No, I'm doing it wrong, guys. I turned in my resignation before this live stream. I'll tell you that much. Did not.
Another life ruined by honest youth pastor.
Wow.
So so what's your initial take on that? Because I know we texted a little bit about this when it was up.
It's weird, right? Because I'm 28, so I'm 2 years under what he's saying the limit is, or like his personal opinion is. Yeah. And I don't think that I disagree with him for the most part. I say for the most part because I do think that there are definitely people who can. I believe I'm doing it all right. I'm not like doing it perfectly, that's for sure. But I think that I've done well, at least leading the youth group and partnering with the parents and all that stuff. But the idea of there being some sort of age in mind, I think is very wise. And I don't really have a problem with it being under 30. I would say that mine would be like under 25 is like a no-go. Like I think about when I was 25. I mean, that wasn't that long ago, but I can think of things I'm like, oh, Jonathan, why? Why were you like this? Like, what are you doing, man? Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be in a great place to lead a ministry, right? But so I mean, right out of the gate, I don't like fully disagree with him. I would actually say that it's probably a wise decision most of the time.
Cool. Now, since you're under 30, we're going to completely ignore what you said. So,
Yes,
Matt, what do you
fine.
think?
I'm like,
He doesn't have enough life ministry experience, you know?
yeah,
So
I'm sorry, guys. Disregard everything I just said. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry.
So, Matt, what's your take? I mean, I honestly, I'll be honest, I don't even know how old you are, but what's your take on this whole? Because I know you
18.
children's ministry, that sort of thing. 18,
Yeah.
you are an old looking 18-year-old.
I am 18 with 13 years of experience.
Oh,
Okay.
So,
nice.
oh well, almost 13 years. I turned 31 in like 3 weeks. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're
So
right
then
in
you can
that
be a youth
bracket now.
pastor.
You can do it.
I know. I can do it now.
Congratulations.
How,
I know of an
how am I
opening.
the oldest one on here? Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, he just resigned.
Yeah,
so.
remember?
So I see the value in what he is saying. That if we are discussing best case scenarios, that I think that would be preferred. I know, as for myself, growing up, all of my youth leaders were actually like well above 30 and 35. Like I think that when I was probably in middle school, my dad stepped up and started leading the youth. Now he's not, he not called particularly into ministry. He's not a preacher. He does have you would say like a gift for teaching, and specifically teaching the Bible. And so he did a good job with that. But I would say that he was probably between 30 and 35 when he stepped up and started doing that. And then the other youth minister, you could say, he was like in his early 60s. And those were the two youth leaders and youth ministers that we had at that time. So I guess that was my experience with that. Now at my current church, where I serve as sort of like one of the two children's ministers, and also like I guess you could say the role of like a teaching pastor, because I write curriculum and do things like that for the church. But one the other children's minister is he is, I think he's 38. So he's also above like that age of 35, and he just started with kids ministries about 2 years ago, and he's also just now getting even his degree in elementary teaching, his bachelor's degree in that. And then I myself, so just to confess, like as far as working with kids, because I've never filled like any kind of a space or capacity for youth leadership or youth ministry as far as middle school and up. I've always functioned in a kids pastor's way, because from the time I was 18, actually one of my first jobs was a substitute instructional monitor in the public school system. And after I had worked a few years in the public school system, that's when my pastor at the church that I was at that point was like, "Hey, what do you think about stepping into the role and serving as a kids pastor?" I will readily admit that I did not do that great of a job. Even as a kids minister, which has a totally different dynamic than trying to pastor middle schoolers and high schoolers, of course. But I think that there are a lot of different factors. I think things like availability goes into this, and we can talk about that. I think it goes into the matter of whether this person that's being evaluated and considered has, we'll say, grown up at this church, has matured at this church, is like well known, and their reputation is already established. They're known to be trustworthy. They're known to be mature. They have they have been taught according to that church's positions and doctrines and statements of belief, etc. So I think that definitely comes into play. So I guess since we said, what Harrison is saying here is like this best case scenario, I think a worst case scenario that his point would then prove would be if you were to literally just have this 18-year-old guy come in, and first time you've ever met him, and like, hey, God has called me into youth ministry, and the pastor's like, hey, we don't have anybody to lead the youth right now. Let's just go ahead and plug you in. Where you can go ahead and start this Wednesday. Like, that would be worst case scenario, and most likely things are not going to go as well as if you had somebody who was, we'll say 30 to 35, who was coming in fresh. Of course.
I heard and I can't remember who it was, but it was a comedian that he was talking about. He found out that his babysitter was 15 when he was 12. And he said, that's like telling a horse to dog sit for you. And I thought that comparison is hilarious when you think about, it's maybe a little bit derogatory, but if you say like, hey, here's a 19-year-old who literally just graduated high school, like they may be really gifted and they may be definitely headed that direction. But I think that you're actually doing them a disservice, and you're doing the youth group a disservice by putting someone, especially that young, in such a big role where they haven't really even had time to leave that ministry and grow past it. Like for me, I would think that the youngest that I say the youngest being, it's all very much based on like the trustworthiness, I guess, that we were talking about, would probably be something like 25 would be the youngest that I would be like, okay, yeah, this might be okay, but depending on certain factors, because I don't know, we do hear a lot of horror stories of youth ministry guys who have gotten themselves in really bad situations with people that are attending the youth group. And, at first you see that and you're like, what? But then you might look and they're like 21 years old, and maybe the female that they got involved with is 18 and graduating. And you're like, that is not a huge age difference there. It's a role difference, and it's definitely a moral issue. But if you look and you're like, okay, well, let's say that there's a 28-year-old and a 31-year-old that decide to get married. People are like, all right, so the age can also become a problem there, especially if they're like unmarried and they're young and they're placed in this like really intense role. Yeah. I think that it can be an issue.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think playing off what both of you guys said, a lot of the major issues that came up, for example, in the DMs were that he had named a certain age, right? That was the big deal. That was a huge deal because the Bible doesn't have a specific age that it has for, elders or pastors. And then the other thing was that people were really overlooking, it seemed like, what you both kind of touched on, which was this life and ministry experience. Yes. This idea that you could objectively see the maturity and giftedness, which he mentions of who's in that role. And when I saw that, what I saw was him saying, hey, there's, sort of this soft callback to qualifications of an elder anyway. Now, again, depending on who you talk to, some people will say that the youth pastor has to be elder qualified. Some will say they don't have to be elder qualified. But he's operating, I think, under that mindset that the pastor is going to be an elder qualified individual. And therefore, I mean, there's certain things that sort of are there as far as maturity wise, obvious gift set wise, just fitting all the qualifications, being able to teach, being above reproach, all of these different things. And I know that, so I out of college into youth ministry was 23. And if it were not for the volunteers, the older volunteers that I had that were helping, that had kids, who knows what terrible theology I would have given them, even out of college. I mean, just reacting in regards to being like, oh, we need, I mean, because I don't know how you guys process ministry when you first got into it, but right out of college into youth ministry, it was like, I had been taught like a very attractional model, like, oh, big events, big things, da 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 da. And so, we all hear the stupid stories that still probably happen of like chugging Diet Coke and, marshmallows through a sock for a game. Like there's a maturity level there that would say, I mean, you probably aren't going to find a lot of 30 to 35-year-olds going, that sounds like a solid idea. Like, but maybe, I mean, you probably, some of them you are, but that goes back to the maturity part of it. That idea of being like, all right, what's a good idea here versus maybe you should. I'm a party pooper. I know that. So, like,
look, Michael, I can take a hint. I'll knock that game off of my planning for this Sunday night. Okay, like
okay,
you don't have to say anymore. I'll knock it off.
I'm not your pastor. I don't oversee you. So,
oh, good. Then I'll keep it.
You talk to your dude.
Yeah.
But like, there is a reality that I look back and I go, oh my goodness, like through the lens of 10 years or even 5. Like there's a lot that changes. And like what you said there, 25, even at 25, I'm looking back going, I don't know. I don't know if I should have done it. Like, should I have been in charge of people at 25? But again, I think what Matt would kind of touched on was that a lot of that changes. Like me thinking back 10 years. So 10 years ago, I only had one kid and she was 4. And that shifted up my whole perspective. And then 5 years ago, like we had our second kid and that shifted up my whole perspective. And just maturity wise looking back going, oh, wow. Okay. Like I could have done things a lot different as far as how to just knowing how to communicate with them, where I was before like, hey, I can tell you how to parent better than you do. And I don't even have kids. Like that was, whenever I was first in youth ministry. And so I think there is a part of that. I mean, not that that's a qualifier clearly, but the only reason that like I didn't probably crash and burn the whole ship was because I did have volunteers there. They were like, hey, Michael, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. And that we're able to step in and be like, hey, be the maturity for me and sort of step in there, which is, I think that's why it's really important to have a good team around you. So yeah, the age thing, I think we're all in agreement. Yes. That like naming an age is kind of not a great idea because that's going to vary by person.
Which I do want to say, like, I think probably what people are also ignoring is the fact that nowhere in that statement did he say this should be the standard in every situation. He says, I wouldn't hire a youth minister who was under the age of 30, even 35. I'd want that person to have at least some life experience that I could objectively look at. I really think that it's so individual, right? Like a pastor is going to have to make that decision. The group, like the elders are going to have to make that decision of, hey, are we comfortable with this person's age? This guy, Daryl B. Harrison, he's not comfortable with that idea. Maybe he has a really, really solid reason for that in his community. And that's okay. Like that's perfectly fine. I think about how many people I'm really thankful for. I am 28. I got married when I had just turned 24. So it's like, I look back at when I got married at 24 and I was like, dang, whoa, what? But I also grew up in youth group. My dad was a pastor, all of this stuff. Not that qualifies me. There we go, guys. I can do it now.
We're going to head it down like a title. Yeah, it's like
pastor,
a belt.
Guys. Yeah, he handed me this baton and I just ran. But I was involved in youth group really heavily. And my youth pastor, his name was Alan. When I turned 18, he was like, hey, I think you could be a youth leader, but like, we're going to work your way up to that. And then when I was about 19, he was like, hey, I think if you're going to be a youth leader, you should actually teach a couple of times. And I like bombed my first lesson. I remember I blew through my notes in 5 minutes and I was like, oh no, but through all of that, he was like fully expecting for me to do that and was cool with that and allowing me to make mistakes. And then it's like, I went and worked in camp ministry and stuff for a while, met my wife, got married really young. But then I guess I would have been 26 when I took the youth pastor position at Hope, where at the age of 26, I felt like pretty okay about it, but I did want to surround myself with leaders that had been there already. And I actually brought on 2 youth leaders that had started attending that were my youth leaders when I was in high school. So they're both, later 50s now, and they're the high school small group leaders. And so I will text, and one of them, he's the husband, he's an elder at the church now. And I will straight up text him or call him and be like, hey, what would your approach be on this? What is your opinion of this? Because first of all, I respect his opinion as a youth leader, but also because he's an elder and he has more life experience. That just makes sense. But I think we are kind of in this weird time where, kind of like what you were saying, the attractional thing, Michael, where it's like everything's so attractional that people are like, we have to get a younger person in here to keep up with it. We've got to get a 22-year-old college student who's like, he's going to be able to run with them, and he's single, so he can invest the amount of time that he needs, all of this
we
stuff.
can pay him hardly anything.
Right. And he'll
doesn't have kids.
Fine. He'll live on ramen the rest of his life, and we'll store him away in a closet somewhere. I don't know. But it's like, he's like 22 and young, but there's like a real need for youth pastors that are older and wiser.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to transition, because I titled this Youth Ministry and Ageism. So I know that the tweet specifically deals with younger, but I want to go the other way too.
Yes.
And I think your example helps a lot in regards to the people that you referenced, that you have. Matt, you even said that some of you were older up in there. One of the youth ministers I had in high school was, I think he at the time was probably 46, maybe 50 when I was 15. So let's speak to that a bit, because I think there is this sort of idea, and a lot of the messages I did get in response to this were, well, how are they supposed to relate? How are they supposed to keep up? How are they supposed to know what's in these kids' heads? Because you gotta be like their age to know what's going on, right?
Oh my goodness.
And I mean, and that's the perspective. Not to knock anybody that messaged me, but the people that were mad were typically the people that were in the category of criticism of the tweet. But again, you're not thinking at that age. I think you're thinking like, oh, well, I know what they're thinking, so I can relate. I can just tell you at 39, though I don't totally understand what's going on inside of my teenage daughter's head, I know, from a parental perspective, an older perspective, I'm able to see things a lot more reasonably outside of that. So, Matt, do you want to speak to a little bit some of the older youth ministers you had, or the people you were talking about, as far as is there a cap, do we think, or do we just think it's a good idea to always have these older people in these youth ministries?
Or is it no cap? See, guys,
Or
that reference is why
I'm
28 in youth ministry.
To be fair, I have to ask for definitions weekly on things. So,
but that's what I was going to say is we say we want the leaders to be, or the leader, or whatever kind of leadership style it is, be relatable. But it's like, do you really want someone who is so like-minded to the immature teenagers?
Dude, yes. Yeah.
Jesus said that if the blind lead the blind, they will both end up in the ditch.
Which, I mean, that's happened at a youth camp at one point. The youth pastor and the kids have ended up in some hole somewhere. Yeah,
exactly. So it's one of those things and it's also funny too, because it's almost like the same thing as saying you can't relate or have a relationship with your grandparents. I don't relate to my grandparents in the way that I would relate to you guys or other peers, but there is still that relational dynamic that can be built. And in saying that, I don't think that there's this ceiling, this cap for the age, and I don't think that there can also be this concrete floor that we can put on the age of an adult for leadership. I think, and I also think that we have to ask ourselves, what leadership style and paradigm are we using? Is it just, okay, there's one youth pastor and he does it all, he runs it all, he supports it all? I mean, that's just unhealthy, unwise in every way. there can be definitely in youth ministry like a plurality of leaders.
Mhm.
And even in that, there are teenagers who are in the youth group who I think some may be spiritually, emotionally, and mentally mature enough to almost be the lay leaders of the youth group. They're the ones that have influence over others in the youth group. And so you know, you have that dynamic that needs to be going on. You can have the plurality of youth leaders, of volunteers, parents, and those that age range can go anywhere from 18, like graduating out of youth ministry and becoming a youth leader, all the way up to I mean, however old the person might be who wants to volunteer and be a part of that youth ministry. And so, and also with the age thing, I think of First Timothy, because on one hand you have First Timothy 4, where Paul tells Timothy, "Let no man despise your youth."
Got a lot of those in the DMs.
Oh
Putting
boy.
that.
He would have
putting
been
that-
like 30 though, honestly, I think, right? In that point, he would have been 30.
So,
Never mind. The math is there. Anyway, I was thinking about that
Sorry.
too.
but when you continue that, it's Paul told him, but to be an example
Mhm.
in word, deed, and spirit, and faith. And so that plays into the fact that whatever age Timothy was, he did have a specific quality of maturity, character, reputation, etc. But then you go back to First Timothy 3, and even though Paul is laying out the qualifications for, an episkopos, a bishop, an overseer, whatever translational label you want to put on that, he says that for that position that they're not to be a novice, lest they be, lifted up and become prideful. So you have to look at both of those things and let them balance one another out, because you can't take Paul's advice to Timothy, don't let people despise you because you're young, and then use that as an excuse to overpower what Paul has said in First Timothy 3 and say, oh, well, here he says that youth doesn't matter, so let's just ignore what Paul said about the bishop and let an 18-year-old be the overseer. So
that's just setting yourself up, man. You put an 18-year-old in there. I took some seminary classes and I'm 18. I know everything. Get out of my way.
Now, I will say I have a youth leader age limit myself. This is crazy because I was an 18-year-old youth leader. And I look back and I'm like, I'm really thankful again for the youth pastor I had, like helping me through that. But I would not put myself at 18 as a youth leader.
So you're shutting the door behind you.
I am. I went through it and was like, see y'all, and just closed it back through. But I think that also, again, is just because I look back at myself at 18 and I'm like, I know the things that I was going through, right? And just like a 30-year-old is going to know the things that a 30-year-old is going through, a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old. But I say that a person has to be out of the youth group a year and a half before that I will consider them for being a youth leader, because I want to see after they leave like the youth group world, right? Do they remain connected with the church? Do they take any action for like personal study? Do they take the time to actually invest like in their relationship with Jesus, while it's not being like necessarily spoon-fed to them during a youth group night after a fun game? So it's like, if I don't see that and they're like, hey, I want to be a youth leader, I'm like, let's sit down and have like actually a longer conversation about this, because I need to know more. But if I see after a year and a half that I'm like, this person's invested, they're willing to serve, I see that they're growing spiritually, then I'm going to consider that more. But that's my own personal limit, because that's kind of what prayed about and felt like would work well there.
Well, that's a good idea, and because I mean, let's be honest, nothing against 8-year-olds. They have a lot of energy, but not a lot of humility most of the time. I mean, honestly, I thank God that there were people in ministry that were able to look at me and be like, "Yo, I love you. You're a little too arrogant. Like you need to step back." Because I mean, that's just the truth of it. I mean, came out of college, I was like, I know everything that no one ever taught me, and you better get out of my way. Like I was
You're all
dangerous.
fools.
Yeah, straight up. You think I'm arrogant in some of the memes I post, guys? You should have seen 22-year-old Michael. It was terrible. A lot of sanctification had to happen, my friends. Still is happening. But like, so a lot of that does, I think you're right. I think that's a really wise thing that people should consider because I mean, we all know in youth ministry, there's a drop off age between graduation and then actually big church, if you want to call it that, right? Like there's everybody knows that sometimes people deliberately try to put them in like roles to help just to keep them, like just so you don't leave. Like, oh, just please don't leave the church. We'll give you something to do here. You can hang out with your friends, only you can boss them around now. And I think that's a really, really wise thing to do is to be like, yo, you got to leave for a minute. And then we'll see if you're good when you come back. Because there is this idea that like, we'll just keep them that way. One thing, we do have a chart that I want to get to as far as like biblical soundness, as far as pastoral positions. But I think the wise thing that you're talking about, Matt, that I was thinking about when you were talking was like Titus 2. This whole idea of older men feeding into younger men, older women feeding into younger women. I think if we don't have like things built into these children and youth ministries where they can see somebody that's 45, 50, 60 that are loving and following Jesus and wanting to pour into them, we're missing out like this huge opportunity. Like if all youth ministry is this cool person, like that dresses like me, talks like me, looks like me, likes the same things as me, that's all you see, then that's what church is to you. Then as soon as you do go to big church and all you see is a bunch of people that with gray hair singing hymns that looks nothing like what you experienced in youth group, like why is anybody literally really surprised that people leave youth group and be like, yo, I don't want anything to do with that? Because I had people that at least I related to, and then I get up here and you're all like, it's like you're going to a whole other church at that point in some regards in some youth ministries. So I think there has to be that mix there of encouraging people to do that. So here's the chart. Now I do want to preface this, guys. I haven't looked into this very much to see, the validity of this. I have seen it passed around online pretty recently, so I'm going to guess. But just so everybody knows, this is apparently the American Worldview Inventory from 2020 put on by the Arizona Christian University, apparently a sampling of 1,000 pastors that was conducted February to March of this last year. Now, biblical worldview, the one thing I don't know, they don't give a definition of what they mean by that. So that's up to a lot of scrutiny because who knows? I mean, their definition of biblical worldview and mine are probably different, or they could be vastly different.
Yeah,
but let's go.
Fundamentalist biblical worldview, progressive biblical worldview.
Yeah, they're like, I viewed a Bible once in the world, so yes,
yes, I have a biblical worldview. So yeah, so just say this is take this with many pinches of salt here. But the idea, I think, kind of plays out pretty well. Just from life experience, this seems to be, I mean, it looks like it's fairly close, meaning that 41% of senior pastors have a biblical worldview. Again, definition needed there. But then we have assistant pastors at 28, teaching pastors at 13. Honestly, that scares me more than the next number we're going to look at. If you're telling me your lead pastor is 41% of a biblical worldview, but your teaching pastor is 13, I don't know what you need. Some just I don't know there's a big problem there. And then children and youth pastors at 12% of biblical worldview. And then executive pastor, which again, these definitions are needed here because what's the difference between lead and executive at 4%? Just don't let the executive pastor say anything, in my opinion, at that point.
From what I'm gathering from that chart, I'm betting executive pastor would be someone that they are like, this is a pastor that runs the office side of things.
Administrative.
Right,
Okay.
like an administrative pastor. And then they're just like, I don't know, look at the books, dude. We don't care what you say.
At that point, though, I looked at
That's
that and I
like
thought,
four.
does no one did nobody look at all at qualifications for elders? Because all
Yeah.
of those should meet every qualification for elder, even if you're an executive pastor, you're in an elder position. But whatever.
They're like, do you believe like 2% of the Bible? And he's like, I don't even know if it's 2%. They're like, can you run a calculator? Okay, yeah, you're hired,
Hired.
man. You passed. Like,
I would also like to know, like, in what area they performed this survey, because, like, if we're
Yeah.
talking about, you know, where is Arizona Christian University?
I
Phoenix,
bet it's in Arizona.
Flagstaff. I bet it is.
This is why you're a youth pastor. You are on it.
Yeah. I've got it, guys. Don't worry about it. I'm mature for a 28-year-old. I couldn't even get through that sentence.
With that said, like, obviously take that with a grain of salt. But I think that typically, most of the time, youth pastors are seen as not as. This is the truth. Whenever I was going through the ordination board for my my denomination, like, it was pretty much said, like, so one day you're going to be a real pastor. And I was like, y'all,
Yeah.
do I want to be ordained by you guys? I don't know, because clearly. But that's
Dude, I get that like semi-regularly, and first of all, I tell people right now, like, I have no aspirations to be like, I want to lead a church. Like, I'm going to be the guy. Like, I love youth ministry, and I rather talk to the youth, honestly. Like, they're much more interesting to have conversations about the Bible with. But I do have people that will be like, so, like, you're going to be like a youth pastor for a while, like, you know, at least at the start, right? You know, then you're going to do something like big boy style, you know?
Big boy style. You're gonna get real theology one day.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So I think to touch on that, because kind of wrap up the stream a little bit, to touch on the kind of the last subject, obviously there's this range, right? So we have this idea of, well, you can't have an older person in youth ministry because they won't be able to relate, or you can't have too young of a person because then they'll just burn the whole thing down with no supervision. But there's this key part of it, I think, that Daryl was touching on in his tweet, which is like, there is a real idea here of like, you're going to be, aside from the pizza and the games and all of the things that are usually associated with youth ministry, there's a real teaching aspect here that needs to happen. So that chart, again, regardless, who knows how accurate it is, but like, oftentimes youth ministry is seen as like not as theologically deep. I mean, that's just the truth of it. But what I've noticed, and I'd like to have you guys like sort of your 2 cents on it, because whenever we started in youth ministry, really digging into the deeper things, that's when the kids got most engaged. That's when the youth ministry actually grew. That's when they actually started, caring and bringing their friends, was when we started getting into like the, well, how do you deal with the topic of evil? What does the Bible mean when it talks about, well, the homosexuality thing was a huge thing every year with them, but like the deeper things of like, what does this mean? They actually started caring because they have the obviously the capability of processing through this, and they want to know. But I think if you have people in those positions, let's just assume that the chart is accurate. If you have people in those positions that don't hold a biblical worldview, that's problematic, like at a horribly concerning level. So what have you found in it? I know, again, with kids, it's a little bit different than youth ministry. But Matt, if we could start with you to kind of wrap this up, like, what have you seen with them as far as like digging in with, obviously there's a limit as far as how deep you can get with kids, but like, what have you seen?
Oh yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Even the younger kids, when you hit a topic that is profound to just like capture anybody's imagination and thought process, and then of course be able to package it in a way that children can receive and comprehend it, they absolutely do latch on to it. I know as I write the curriculum for our kids ministries, I'm always very intentional in the way that I write it. That's part of the reason why, sort of 2 reasons why brought on and hired and write the curriculum. Number one is because of the way that we do our teaching series that we do throughout the years. Like we have, certain times we do like a series on an Old Testament book, a series on a New Testament book. We do a series on stewardship and the Holy Spirit, et cetera, once a year. So it's hard to like find kids curriculum that aligns to what we're, explicitly trying to do. And then I also coordinate with our other pastors, so that like the adults and the kids are essentially like learning the same things.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, so that does not happen a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, in the sanctuary, you're learning about the supremacy of Christ, and in kids ministry, you're learning that David hit Goliath in the head with a rock. So we try to avoid that. Not that there's not a time and a place to learn that David hit Goliath in the head with a rock, but I want my 6-year-olds to be able to say, Christ is Lord and King in the same way that that the adults are. So that's one of the reasons why we do it. And then another reason is that no offense at all against the people who do produce and write children's curriculum, because there are great and awesome, what is the, I don't know, what's the plural of curriculum?
Curriculum, yeah, mooses, yeah, whatever. Just throw an S on it.
Whatever it is. I mean, I'm sure there's good quality theologically, biblically sound
stuff,
criteria out there, but
nice youth ministry answers stuff.
yeah, stuff's around.
Just trying to balance between the two is so difficult. And also, just like a shameless plug, for Michael and HYP, like we're about to dive into, in the summer, we're going to be using the Apostles' Creed.
There it is.
Coloring book curriculum for our summer in our kids ministries. So there that is. But yeah, I hope that got to a little bit of what your question was getting at.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I like that because you won't find a lot of 6 to 12-year-olds that can even tell you about the supremacy of Christ. Almost always it's like, like they know David got, killed Goliath. They know that Noah had an ark, and they're pretty sure that Jesus rose from the dead. But like after that, it's a little sketchy sometimes on some of the stories we tell them. So what about you, Jonathan? I know like with youth ministry, one of the reasons I really wanted you and Matt both on the team was that you take the Bible incredibly seriously. You teach it well. So like what in youth ministry, how do you focus it to be like, hey, I know these kids like have the capacity to learn these things. How do you address that? What have you seen as a result of that?
Probably sometime last year, I kind of just had this moment where I was like, you know what? They hear worse things at school than anything that's in the Bible. Like as far as, you look at the book of Judges and you're like, dang, that's really intense. And there's like some really messed up stuff happening, but they hear worse at school. My 6th graders that are in the youth group hear worse, and they have questions about it. And, it's one of those things where I've started talking with the parents where I'm just like, you understand they already know about some of this, and that they already have really deep questions about why things are happening or why things are the way that they are. And so, for example, I have a lot of them. They spend a lot of time on the internet, obviously. I partially blame Christian memes for this. It might be our fault. But they see a lot of weird Bible stories out of context, and they're like, what the heck is going on? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to take some of these weird stories, and I'm going to help them understand what it looks like to read one of those stories in the context of what's happening around it, so that they can understand like more about who God is through these really strange stories. For example, this past week was Elisha and the she-bears. Like I literally taught a lesson on she-bears running down the mountain and mauling 42 boys. You're like, what? Yeah. But if you look at like the fact that Elijah's like ascent into heaven is right before that, and then the passing on of that to Elisha, and what was happening in the nation then, what that idolatry looked like, what worship of Baal looked like, what was involved in that as far as ceremonies and stuff. And then you understand that these young men were most likely attendants of that temple because of the number of them and where they were in location to it. And the fact that they were mocking a prophet of God and they were mocking God as well, saying, we don't want anything to do with you. Then you see Elisha basically quote Leviticus, I'm sure, because he was like, I'm calling wild animals on you under the name of the Lord. And the Lord handles this situation. And so to show them, you're like, yes, this is a violent moment. And yes, it's odd. But at the same time, you understand that God was completely just in this decision from the context of what you're seeing. And you also see that it was actually God who handled that situation. It wasn't Elisha. It wasn't anybody else. God was the one who had the final say and the final authority on this. And the conversation we got out of that was unbelievable because it actually, like, it made them think about, hey, you know, like, God handled this situation in a way that maybe I haven't thought about before. Why is that? I have a lot of questions about it.
Mhm.
You know, and even looking at the high schoolers on Wednesday nights, we've been just with 9th through 12th grade. We sit down. We don't have anything attractional really going on other than maybe we might meet at a restaurant. And we sit down, and for an hour and a half, we have been reading through books of the Bible. And I asked them, I was like, what is the next book y'all want to go on? And they were like, we want to do Job. And I was like, all right, well,
Oh my goodness.
here we go. So we get to chapter 4 of Job where he's just like, I wish I was never born. I wish I had like died in the womb and like the day that I was born had never happened. And we had this unbelievable conversation of like, okay, Job still never turned against God in that moment, but we see him voicing out like massive discouragement and having a moment where he's like, I wish I didn't exist. And the conversation we had about like suicide and the Lord's like working in a person's life, no matter what circumstances they may be going through, and how we can approach God with those things, how we can be supportive as believers to other believers going through that. Like, they already are asking these questions, but the difference is they're asking the people in their schools,
Mhm.
and they're asking their friends, and they're getting the world's worldview. So if the church isn't just basically manning up and saying like, we can talk about this too, then they're just going to be like, there are no answers in the church and I'm out, and they're going to walk away. So like for me, I've reached this point where I'm like, I make sure the parents know what we're talking about, but also like, I'm not going to dodge like weird things that might not seem cool. They might not, you know, is this too intense? You can still communicate it and help them see who God is and what he has done through that. So does that answer?
No, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
well, that's great because I mean, I think what's wonderful about that is that I don't know of any other junior high group that was like, hey, we're gonna do Job. Like
Dude,
that.
yeah.
Well, and I think that's a great thing because that what you just described honestly puts them in a position in which they've really started. They at least have a skeleton idea of how to work through these difficult ideas and how to process them within a contextual biblical idea before they while they're in high school, which most people don't do that until they're in college. And by the time they get there, again, there's so much of more of a I'll talk about worldly or cultural worldview, however you want to word it, but it's not biblical. And so it's like the people that have already processed through that in a different way that are much more astute and accustomed to processing that way. Then they're just like, I don't know how to even combat this idea. And then they just, again, walk away. So I think giving them the tools to do that and giving them the opportunity to say, what do you want to do next? And then demonstrating, okay, well, this is how you walk through something contextually. This is what you can grab through it as far as not only now, but what, you know, Christians throughout time have garnered from this text, I think is incredibly helpful. And I think it just demonstrates that they want to know it. And
Well,
if you, yeah.
And kind of the purpose with the high schooler group is to, as they get older, take them out of an environment like, yes, they still go to youth group. Yes, we still play games. We have snacks. We have a lot of fun stuff that goes on, but we obviously focus on teaching and small group discussion. But on a Wednesday night, it's like, hey, this is literally what a community small group does. is you get together with other believers and you study a book together. You study scripture. This doesn't have to stop when you graduate high school. Like if y'all graduate out of not if they will. Well, some I might question if they will ever graduate, but it's like, you know, if they graduate high school and they're 18 and they're like, hey, we still want to meet and study the Bible. I'm like, go and do it. Like, I'm not stopping you from studying scripture together. Like, if you have a question, ask me. You can do that after you're out of youth group as well. This can continue, and you now hopefully see the value in it and how you can enjoy being together and just studying scripture. Like, that's kind of been where I've been at, what I'm trying to do.
Hey, no, good. Yeah, no, just planting seeds, man. Planting seeds and watering.
Yeah.
So, good deal. We need to wrap it up. Hopefully that was helpful though for you guys that are watching. Obviously, there's this very clear maturity level that comes into children's ministries, youth ministries that needs to be assessed by each church clearly. But there are standards which we have in the Bible, not only qualifications for pastors, elders, but also we have this really beautiful model of what we've talked about, of like Titus 2 and the model that you've talked about there, Jonathan, where you're just walking them through, teaching them how to do it. And I think no one's going to do this perfectly. We're all going to make mistakes, but the idea is that we're trying to, as a fellowship of believers, wherever your local fellowship is, do this in such a way to demonstrate in our lives how to follow Jesus to those underneath us, and to then look up to those that are, have lived life beyond us and look at them for models as well. So guys, hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, make sure you like it, comment, all the cool things. You know how the algorithm does. If you don't share something, YouTube's like, well, that sucks. So they won't do it. So yeah, so make sure you do that below, because, we're all about algorithms and how to get things out to people. So
I'm like, the like button somewhere over there, subscribe somewhere. I don't know.
I can't even
ignore the dislike.
officially point to you.
Yeah. Like,
so I don't even know. Yeah, down somewhere below.
Yeah, somewhere there.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, watching. We'll talk to you on the next stream. Bye.